Hey guys, happy Friday. I hope you're all doing well today. I'm going to wait for a couple of minutes and see if people pile in. This is, for me, going to be a fun stream because I'm kind of known for lugging these books around that I'm going to share with you guys. So I have a few friends locally that are interested in some of these topics. And I always want to show them just kind of what I'm reading, and I have some stuff to share that I think you guys are going to be interested in. So if you're here, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And if you catch this after the fact, I appreciate that as well. So if you guys weren't aware, I uploaded a video earlier this week. It's called "What is Northern Symbolism?" It's on the video tab of my page. And if you have not seen it, you should definitely check it out. Hey there, Jake. Nice to see you, man. Thank you for showing up. As you can tell, I'm going through a bit of a transition here on the channel. Uh, for a couple of years, I was creating content around astrology, and I'm so glad I did that. It gave me an amazing foundation with all things related to astrology, and I just learned so much, and I feel like I put out a lot of good work. But, I would say over the last couple of years, in particular, I started getting very, very interested in Northern symbolism, or what I call polar symbolism as well. And ever since then, I started collecting books related to this topic. And this topic really is it's fascinating, and it's a bit of a paradigm shift. And there's so many different angles to it that I found myself collecting books that were related to polar history, related to like theosophy, related to a lot of things that you wouldn't necessarily equate with Northern symbolism. But sure enough, I find value in buying books and in going through resources that maybe just have one particular angle, but I think could serve, my research. As an example, I have a book called Phallic Worship, so I haven't read that one yet, but you can tell just by the name and what I've looked into with it that there is going to be stuff related to polar symbolism, the world axis, things like that. And so one of my goals is basically to show you guys where I'm pulling some of this information from and to share resources with you guys so that if you wanted to take your research with this subject to the next level, you guys can purchase these books. You guys can read some of this stuff for yourself. And basically, you don't have to take my word for it with any of this. So this is like something that I've wanted to do for a little while. And because I am turning a corner with leaning into northern and polar symbolism, I figured the first few videos I make under the True North banner, which is, what episode one was under, what is Northern symbolism. I figured these first few videos should be like introductory videos and should maybe catch you up to speed with a few concepts or ideas if you haven't seen my interviews or other presentations and whatnot. So that's what I'm doing today. I'm sharing uh, 18 titles, 18 books that I actually have on hand. They're all right here. I'm going to go through these books and let you know some of the things that I found to be valuable within them, how they pertain to Northern symbolism and polar research. And just to be completely clear, too, I have not read all of these books. So I've read, I would say, probably like 40% of these books I've thumbed through or heavily referenced. I don't know, maybe 20 more percent. And then the rest I haven't really dove into that much. But just by the nature of, the author and obviously the title and what research I've done with that book, I know that it is going to serve me well at some point. I know there's going to be things that I can glean from it and things like that. So, I will be clear with which books I have read and which books I have not read and things like that. Just so, everything is completely transparent on that end. One of the other goals actually behind doing this is I'm hoping that someone out there, maybe a few of you, are interested enough in this material where maybe you'll purchase one of these books or a couple of these books, and maybe you can read it, and maybe we can compare notes, and maybe you can let me know what you got from it. So, I'm sure avid readers around the world obviously are familiar with the whole entire the kind of bedside bedstand stack of books you know that you want to get around to, but there's just not enough time of the day. So I figure if I just share these titles with you guys, maybe someone out there will check them out, and then we can chat and talk. And yeah, to me that sounds like a good time. So without further ado, let's get started with the first title here. um let's see. Let's go with this layout here. Okay, so the books range from 1885 all the way up to 2020. And there are other titles that are older. I'm sure there are other titles that are newer, but these are what I have on hand or what I have already read through. So I know there's a few other books that would be perfect to add to this video here, this stream, this list, which, by the way, the list is in the description. So I wrote that out, put it in the description, so you don't have to take notes if you don't want to. You can just copy and paste that list or do your own research from there. But I know there's other titles that would be great to add here that I do not have, and so I just left them out. And then I also have other books that are more so symbolic reference books that I feel like would be great to have here as well. But since they're not necessarily focused on Northern symbolism or polar symbolism, but they do mention things about it in the book, I just decided to leave those out. So maybe at some point I'll create another list of symbolic reference books that routinely make reference to the world axis. And so that's one thing that I'm keeping tabs on now too, is symbolic books that are symbolic dictionaries or encyclopedias that actively, refer to the world axis in their entries. And so I've noticed that older symbolism books tend to do that more. Newer symbolism books tend to do that less. Because I feel like this is such a foundational key to symbolism, I think that there's a lot of value there if the book decides to make that reference. And so here's one book. Let's get started here. So this is from 1885. This is by William F. Warren. This is called Paradise Found, The Cradle of the Human Race at the North Pole, a study of the prehistoric world. And so here it is right here. Obviously, this is just a modern reprint of the book. And this seems to be a classic with this subject matter. And so I had to pick it up. This is one of the books I have not read through personally. I've thumbed through it, but if you just read, the contents, the chapter titles, you can see how intriguing it is. So as an example, there are several chapters here. One is called The Eden Stars, The Eden Day, The Eden Zenith, The Navel of the Earth, The Central Tree, things of that sort. And so I'm really excited to get around to this one. And this whole subject matter really is it's a tradition. You're tapping into a tradition. And so for a long time, I think when I was looking into this material, I thought I was kind of in no man's land in a way. But the more I research these titles, the more I look into this material, the more I am realizing that, this is actually a tradition that has legs. There's a lot to get into with this. There's a lot of material that basically is a direct reference to the geocentric era and the idea that humanity came from the North Pole and that there was some sort of cataclysm or some sort of flood, some sort of pole shift, and that from there people had to migrate to different parts of the world. And so I know that this is what this book is largely about, right? This paradise at the north. And so, and this too, by the way, this material, this subject matter, in the 1800s, it seems like this was definitely more of a thing. And I knew that this stream was going to get into all sorts of different sort of tangents and whatever. But I just, I think that there's something to be said about polar symbolism, polar magic, the Northern Mysteries, and Antiquitech and Tartarian technology. I think that the technology of old was tapping into some of the principles that you'll find within Northern symbolism. And I think a lot of geomancy as well basically kind of speaks to some of the things that I'm researching right now when it comes to polar symbolism and things like that. So I'm really of the opinion now that Northern symbolism, polar symbolism, geocentrism, and everything having to do with the world axis, I really think that it actually is maybe one of the kind of occult secrets that people are kind of overlooking. I think that a lot of magic actually has to do with Northern symbolism and the Northern mysteries. And so that's something that I'll be expanding on in the future. But with that said, Paradise Found, really interested to read this. I know I'll get around to it at some point, but I'm glad I have it right now at the very least. I can't forget to drink water because I tend to do that. Oh, yeah, there you go. I'm just kind of glancing at the chat. A Northern book club sounds fantastic. I'm all in. Hey, I'm down. I would be down to host that and figure something out because the more we can just kind of wrap our head around this concept, collectively, I think the better off we will be, the more we'll learn. And that just sounds like a good time. So, actually, one of the books in this list is the next book club book that I'll be reading with a few friends locally, which is pretty cool. And so, we've read a couple of books that are related to this material, and I am very grateful that I know at least some people in real life that are interested in all of this. So the second book that I have here is from 1888, and this is The Secret Doctrine by Madame Blavatsky. So here it is. And I actually purchased my copy at a Theosophical Society book sale. So they were moving and they had a ton of awesome books. So the fact that I got this from them directly is pretty interesting. I can't say I'm so familiar with Blavatsky's work. I have not read much of her material, but I did visit her school in India, which was really interesting. I spent a day there in their library, and it was really it was a trip just to kind of be there and to have access to their full library. At the time, I was really interested in Saturn, so I was doing a lot of Saturn research. I was reading some random old book from way back in the day about Saturn in her library. So I thought that was kind of cool. But anyway, this book, wow. I mean, I recently just added this to the list because a friend texted me and she reminded me of the root race concept. So in this book, they go over the 7 root races, and underneath those root races, there's sub races, right? The first root race, they were called sometimes they're called the invisible race, but they're also referred to as a polar race or the Polarian race from the polar epoch or the Polarian epoch. And so that blew my mind. My friend just sent me a text and it was just a little video summarizing what that's all about. And so, according to Madame Blavatsky, the first root race was polar in nature. And so, therefore, I mean, I just feel like I need to dive into this book, learn as much as I can. I know there's a few people in the chat that have read her material. If anyone has a good grasp over the root race concept that Blavatsky proposed or whatever put forth, I would love to talk to you. And so I feel like just because of that, the polar race concept, and then some of the other races are like the Hyperboreans, right, beyond the north, or the Lemurians and Atlanteans and things like that, the Aryans. The word Aryan, I'm of the opinion that Aryan essentially means, it's a northern reference ultimately. And so that's why there's Northern Europeans who consider themselves Aryan. There's also people in the Vedic world in India who consider themselves Aryans, which actually ties into the next book nicely because it is called, well, actually, this is one of the books I don't have. So I'm jumping ahead of myself. But there's a very interesting connection with Northern symbolism and in India and also with the swastika. And so this Aryan concept is something that I want to unpack at some point because you know, basically what it means to be Aryan, I really just think it has to do with coming from the North, right? And so that's a whole subject, you know, that I'm not quite prepared to talk about, but we should totally get into it at some point because it is a thread absolutely worth pulling at. There's a lot of controversial subjects related to Northern symbolism and Northern history and things like that too. That again, I'm not sure if I'm prepared to speak about at length, but at some point, obviously, we'll go there. So, 1888, the Secret Doctrine. I know there's polar symbolism in here, and also there's a lot of references. She breaks down the number 7 quite a bit, and so even if you look at the symbol in the upper left, hopefully it's big enough. But there's a little swastika, you know, in that circle up top. To me, that is just a direct reference to Ursa Major, right, going around the pole star. So this is from 1893. This is called The Night of the Gods. I do not have this one, but I read an original copy of Volume 1. So this is by a guy named John O'Neill. So this is The Night of the Gods, an inquiry into cosmic and cosmogonic mythology and symbolism. And this book blew my mind. The same friend who texted me about the Polarian race or the polar race basically purchased volume 1 at a used bookshop. She paid like $175 or something for it. And she sent me a picture of the table of contents and she said, you have to read this. You should find a PDF or whatever. Later on, she would let me just borrow it, and I read it from cover to cover. And this guy, John O'Neill, basically says that um, the modern symbolic framework that we operate with comes from a polar symbolic perspective, and that a lot of deities today are misunderstood because oftentimes they're associated with solar symbolism, but back in the day they were associated with polar symbolism. And so I took so many notes for this book because it was so dense. But in 1893, this guy wrote a book saying what most people understand about symbolism is wrong. It actually has a lot to do. The modern symbolic sort of perspective has a lot to do with polar symbolism, unbeknownst to most people. And so he went through specific examples of deities from like Egyptian mythology and said that this is an misunderstood deity. Egyptologists, modern Egyptologists, don't know what they're talking about. This deity is not a solar deity, it is a polar deity. It is a northern deity. And so he opened me wide up. And I think he made a very, very strong case that there's something about all of this. And so when I read this, it was one of the big game changers for me because I think that, you know, from what I read and from other sources and everything that I've looked into, that he's right, that he's absolutely right. I have not read volume 2, but I think that I will at some point. I have PDFs of both of these books, by the way, and I have PDFs of I think maybe 1 or 2 other books. So if you're really interested, you think you're going to read this, and you want a PDF, shoot me a message and I can send you a link. So this one's a good one. And the Night of the Gods is a reference to, you know, the Arctic Circle and the extremely long nights and days that they have, given the fact that they're, you know, up north and they're in the circumpolar region. And so this is a really good one. It's a dry read though, so you have to really be interested in this information to want to absorb it. But I personally got a lot out of it. and he just is like myth busting left and right, saying that a lot of this stuff is northern symbolism. So, and thank you once again for being here if you're here live. Okay, so the next book I have right here, it is The Arctic Home in the Vedas. So this is kind of another classic book. Um, and this is from an Indian guy, 1903, and he's making the case that humanity, comes from the north. It comes from the North Pole, and so once again, there's this strong connection with this Aryan label or title, with Indians from India and with Northern Europeans, and so it's a really fascinating concept to kind of think that. Um, Many groups of people thought that they came from the north. And so, what's going on with all of that? So, as you can see, the books that I'm reading, they kind of vary, and they're some are more historical than not necessarily symbolism books, not necessarily mythology books. But I'm actually kind of just trying to absorb anything that I think is going to help, inform my symbolic awareness of things. And so I'm just kind of like willing to go, in these different places, and hopefully glean a few, nuggets of wisdom as I go through that process. But he has a table of contents here, obviously, and some of these chapters are called, the glacial period, the Arctic regions, the night of the gods. Here's another reference to the night of the gods, the Vedic dawns, the cow's walk, comparative mythology, et cetera, et cetera. So this is another one where I have not read, but it has come recommended to me by a few people who are interested in this topic. So I'm sure at some point I'll get around to it. It just has not been my time yet. The next book is actually one that I'm actively reading right now, and I have been for a couple of months. So this is called Celestial Ship of the North by Valentia, Straiton. This book is amazing. And I'll say that the Night of the Gods book and the Celestial Ship of the North book and a couple of others, these older books, man, they are so dense with information. I almost have to just read like page by page, because I'll read one page and my mind is blown, and I'm taking all these notes and I'm highlighting things and everything else. And then I just have to stop because my cup is full. And so this is one of those books where this thing has so many amazing revelations about the North. And in particular, here it is, my personal copy. Um, One of the revelations, or one of the big things about this book, is it really talks about the idea of a northern goddess, of a northern primordial mother that exists in the northern sky and has a correspondence with the North Star. And oftentimes she is related to a ship. And so, one of the things I read in this book was that at one point in time, the seven stars of Ursa Major were considered seven sailors, and she was the ship. And so this gets into bow symbolism, arc symbolism, travel symbolism, this whole ship concept. Basically, what I think is that, all traveling modalities, all vehicles, whether it be a car or a chariot or a horse, even, or a ship, it all has to do with psychopomp symbolism. It all has to do with the great trip, which is going to the other side, which is going, to the great beyond, which is the journey of the afterlife. So I think that traveling and travel symbolism all has to do with this epic journey, the journey upon death and what happens afterwards. And so I think that you can make the direct case that, again, horses, chariots, boats, it's all part of the same lineage. And so I think it all has to do with going to the northern portion of the night sky, or at least that's what some people believed. One of the other things too this book fleshes out from what I've read so far is this idea of the Typhonian tradition and how the Typhonian tradition corresponds with the northern sky. So there is a lot of dark mother symbolism that relates to the northern sky. There's a lot of chaos symbolism that relates to the northern sky. And so it kind of touches upon the origins of all of that and why that's the case. And when I say dark mother, I don't look at that negatively. When I say like a chaos mother, I don't look at that negatively. I just it's more of like it is what it is sort of thing. That there's a tradition that goes way back about a primordial mother existing in the northern sky. And so that's just something that needs to be kind of understood with all of this stuff. But this book gets into that. Um, and there's just lots of gems in here. So, as an example, one of the things it says in the book is that one of her children is Sirius, the star Sirius. And so there is a relationship with the northern sky and with Sirius, which I think is absolutely fascinating. And so I'm having a good time reading this one for sure. Um, so some of the chapters here: the mother of mystery, the land of light. There's a whole section about the world tree, the celestial waters, the sacred four. The four directions, the four corners of the earth or universe, or the four winds. Including the north wind, right? Heavenly measures, poles of heaven and earth. You know, so there's just a lot of stuff going on here. And like I said, it's taking me a long time to read because there is, it's just, my mind's blown every single time, I turn a page. Some illustrations include the ship of the North, constellation of the Great Bear, the Virgin Mother, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is awesome. I highly recommend this one. And so there you go. The next one here. So from 1927 to 1941, this is Phallic worship, a history of sex and sexual rights. And I've actually had this one for a while. I had it before I really got into Northern symbolism, and I have yet to read it. I bought it at Goodwill for like $3, right? But just being interested in symbolism, I knew that it would come in handy. And phallic worship, I mean, uh, Hermes, Mercury, a lot of psychopomps are very much related to the phallus, which is why they're related to the pole, which is why they're related to the pillar and the post and things like that. And so I'm excited to read this one at some point because I just know that there's going to be stuff related to northern polar symbolism that'll be relevant for sure. And just symbolically in general, I think it makes sense that this would be something that I absorb at some point. So this is by a guy named George Ryley Scott. And, some of the chapters include the creation of the gods, sun, moon, and nature worship, the birth of phallicism, the phallic factor in sexual promiscuity, the connection between serpent worship and phallicism. I always say poles and holes, right? And so it would make sense that I would have to I have to read this. I feel like it's my duty to finally get around to this at some point. Phallicism in the Bible, phallicism in ancient Greece and Rome, the phallic gods of India. So I don't see how this wouldn't have things related to northern polar symbolism just by nature of what it is. And again, this is not a direct reference to the world axis or the central pole or anything else, but you can see that this is going to be worthwhile regardless. And for whatever reason, I have seen this one at multiple thrift stores over the years. And so maybe, I don't know. I think that's kind of funny. Nice. Nice to see you, man. Thanks for being here. Absolutely. It's great. It's just taken me a while to get through it, but for sure, there's lots of great stuff in there, huh? All right. So this one's kind of an interesting one. This is called Hamlet's Mill. So this is from 1969, and a friend recommended this to me. And the mill metaphor is a metaphor about the sky. It's about the sky going around the central star that is the North Star. And so my understanding is I've used this book, by the way, as a reference book. And so I love books that have like a really nice detailed index. And this one has that. And so over the years, I would thumb through this book, go through the index, and look up, you know, Cancer symbolism or see if there's anything about Aquarius. And I found lots of stuff about, various stars and constellations and things like that. But the heart of this book has to do with the turning of the heavens. And so that's the mill, right? A mill turns. Elsie King, who's in the chat, he's related it as well to the threshing floor, which makes perfect sense. So it's a wheel, it's wheel symbolism. So Hamlet's mill is a reference to this turning of the cosmos. And this was the first time through this book. And I'm pretty sure the first time I ever saw it, I was looking at an original copy. But this is the first time I saw some works of art where generally it's like a mountain that has something wrapped around it, like in Vedic mythology. There's a world mountain, and it's wrapped with a serpent, and then there's two groups of demigods that are pulling the serpent back and forth. And so this turning or churning creates the nectar of the gods. And there's a whole sort of thing about all of this stuff. But long story short, there's multiple myths where there's a central mountain or there's a central here. It kind of looks like a drill. I'll make my screen larger so you guys can hopefully see it. Right? Do you guys see that there? So this is Horus and Set, and they have like a vine. I could be mistaken. It could be a rope, something else. But see how it's wrapped around this drill? And so they're going back and forth. And so there is this turning that occurs because of it, right? And it shows multiple examples of this in the book. And so here's what I was just talking about. Right? Do you see the serpent wrapped around that central sort of like pillar post thing? And then I'll go the other way. And so there you go. Sometimes, like I said, it's a mountain. And this is a metaphor of the turning of the cosmos. And so this is what this book is all about. And my understanding is that when this came out, I should do more research, but I'm pretty sure these guys are from, the university system, from academia. And they came out with this book, and apparently it was pretty controversial when it came out, because you're talking about geocentric concepts, in the modern world under heliocentrism, everything revolves around the sun, but under the polar sort of tradition, everything's revolving around this central axis, which is the North Star. And so, again, this mill concept is symbolic of that. And so, when this came out, yeah, my understanding is that it wasn't well received by academia. So that's kind of no surprise, though. So Hamlet's Mill, this is also a classic, if I didn't say that already. And I think it'll be worth my time to dive into completely at some point instead of just using it like a reference book. I have to remember to drink stuff because I'll literally forget. And when I stream, I need lots of liquids. I have like several things going on over here. Right. So the next book. So we skipped a few decades here, but this is Dawn Behind the Dawn. So a search for the earthly paradise by a fellow named Geoffrey Ashe. And this one also came recommended to me by a friend who's a mythologist. So I am grateful. Shout out, even though I know he doesn't watch my streams, shout out to my friend Gregory. So he's a mythologist. He has been looking into mythology and symbolism for decades. He's older than me, and he turned me on to some excellent titles. and has really helped me understand some of this material better. We don't exactly see eye to eye on everything, but to me, if I'm already looking into a book and I'm asking someone directly, like, what books do you have or would you recommend that have to do with northern or polar symbolism? And it's the same books that I'm already looking into, or he recommends something and then someone else recommends that too. I mean, obviously, there's something going on there that's worthwhile. But this is one of the books he recommended, Dawn Behind the Dawn. And this gets into this paradise concept, the idea that there was a paradise at the north, and that this is where the Garden of Eden was, and that this is where the cradle of humanity actually is. To me, it's really interesting that there are so many different stories about the origin location of humanity. And I feel like I should expand on this a little bit right now. Um, and I actually think that's a healthy thing. I think if a people believe, say, whatever, they live on some island and they're like, no, this is the origin of humanity, is this island. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it means that you actually have a strong culture. And so this is a natural thing. And so I don't think it's such a bad thing for groups to feel empowered and for groups to have a culture that they're proud of. Um, and so a lot of groups, when they have that like baked into their worldview, I think there's lots of beautiful things that come with that. Obviously, that can turn into something else, right? And there's examples of this throughout history. But what I've noticed is that there are so many supposed origins of humanity because a lot of these groups have a very strong identification with their homeland. And if you have a strong identification with your homeland, if you like where you grew up, if you like your people, if you want to defend your country or nation or region or whatever, you might ultimately develop a cosmology that says that your people came from that location, that this is the origin of humanity. And so there are multiple examples of supposed Garden of Eden locations because of this reason, because they strongly identify with this location and they have a sacred center. And a lot of times, this sacred center is symbolized or identified with a tree or a mountain or a mound or a cave. There's all sorts of different examples of this. And so that was their cultural sacred center location. And I have a book in a couple of books here that really got into this and really helped me understand what this is all about. And so the search for the earthly paradise, I think you can make the case, arguably, that it has existed in a lot of different places because it just depends on who you ask. But I think what is going on is that all of them, and I think this is more of a subconscious thing in a way, are mirroring the dynamic at the north with having this central sort of totem, this central pole, or this standing stone, or whatever it may have been, this tree. They're mirroring the dynamic at the north because my understanding is that a lot of ancient peoples, their cosmology was more northern, meaning that they paid attention more to the North Star and Ursa Major and Minor, and that rotation. And they considered the North Star to be either a god or goddess sort of star. And there's this sort of eternal, tranquil, still sort of quality. And they also believed that laws and order had something to do with what was going on at the north with this world axis. That the world axis, the world pillar, is where we get order from. And so that's a whole thing, right? If you're interested in that topic specifically, I suggest you watch my Decoding Chaos presentation on Interverse. I did that. It feels maybe it's been like a few months or something, but I really, really go into that symbolism about how the pole is what brought order to things symbolically. And so, anyway, so a search for earthly paradise. It makes sense that many people would think that paradise or the origin of humanity existed in many different places. And so how many theories are there about Atlantis? there are many theories about Atlantis, but they all are mirroring the same idea. And there's some locations that are very much symbolic of this origin of humanity sort of concept that exists, and it's just like out in the open. So as an example, in Jerusalem at the Temple Mount, this is one of those sacred center cultural locations, and people flock from all over the world to see it and to go there. And so according to who you ask, you're going to get different interpretations about where the origin of humanity is. And so anyways, kind of a spiel, kind of going on a tangent here, but this book supposedly has a lot of great research, and also very much gets into, if I haven't said this already, the number 7. So there's lots of septenary symbolism in this book, and I was thumbing through it yesterday or the day before, and sure enough, it was all over the place. So you can't separate the number 7 with some of this material. And so several of these books get into that heavily. And I know this one does for sure. So I'm excited to finally dig into this one at some point. All right. So from 1991 all the way to 1992. And so Arctos, the Polar Myth in Science, Symbolism, and Nazi Survival by Joscelyn Godwin. So I'm actively reading this one right now as well. So there's a few that I'm reading at this very moment, and this is one of them. There's my copy. And it is interesting. Here you can see on the cover, you can see the pole star or central star. You can see, the star trail, the time-lapse trail. You could see right next to that central star, that is Ursa Minor. And then a bit further away to the lower right, that is Ursa Major. And so obviously, in case you weren't aware, there's a lot of polar symbolism with Nazi symbolism and mythology and everything else, which is a fascinating rabbit hole. And I just want to say, without getting too deep into the weeds with it, I am not a, I just think that the world wars that we've experienced, I think there's more than meets the eye with them. So the official narrative, I think, should always be questioned with everything, including this material. And this guy gets into polar symbolism and that whole entire history. I mean, obviously, the National Socialists use a swastika, and they use the swastika for a very good reason. This could be a whole rabbit hole conversation. This could be a whole breakdown. This could be a big old series, essentially. But Northern symbolism with the runes, with various Nazi ideologies and stuff, very much meshed together. So you kind of can't avoid it. So I am learning as much as I can about it. And I have for years too. And this book has been on my radar for a little while, but I'm just getting around to it. And it is an excellent read so far. He is getting into the same idea that, this belief that people came from the north and that there was some sort of catastrophe or shift, and then people had to migrate. And so this idea, by the way, of paradise, my understanding is that when most people talk about this northern paradise, they're essentially referring to it as like a golden age, and that there were equal parts day and night, meaning it never changed. Meaning that there was like one season and it was ideal and you could grow food and there was abundance and things like that. But once this shift happened, once this pole shift happened, once there was this flood or whatever it may have been, that's when people needed to migrate to different lands. And then that's when everything got thrown off. And then, what he's saying is that there was this idea that a lot of people think that paradise or the Garden of Eden was at the north. And then once this shift occurred, they went to Asia. And then from there, they migrated elsewhere. So there's all these different concepts, right? But just from reading the material, I am getting something out of it symbolically. And so I consider it to be, at least right now, an excellent read. So definitely looking forward to wrapping this one up. Even here, I just am flipping through, the chapters here. And hopefully you guys can see that right up my alley. Chapter 9, the hole at the pole, right? And so gets into the Thule Society or Thule Society, however you say it, those origins, things like that, the Northern Lights, Hyperborea, what have you. So very, very interesting. Let me get a sip here and maybe look at the chat for a second. Okay. Interesting. I didn't know that. Alan Marcus says Hamlet's Mill was out of print for a period of time. I wasn't aware. Yes, indeed. That is the deal. Yeah, I agree for sure. There's polar symbolism that I don't know if it's been directly addressed in the community, but it makes me wonder. They say that Saturn was once the old sun. I actually wonder if it was once the old pole star. Um, and there's something to be said. There's a conversation to be had regarding Saturn and polar symbolism for sure. So moving on, this is this is such a great read, guys. I've referenced it multiple times in various streams, but obviously it has to be included here. This is one of the books I've read, and it's called At the Center of the World: Polar Symbolism Discovered in Celtic, Norse, and Other Ritualized Landscapes by John Michell. And I found out that John Michell actually wrote another book called The Sacred Center, and it's about locating like ancient temples. This book is mostly focused on where it says right here Celtic, Norse, and other ritualized landscapes. So definitely lots of European locations are addressed, lots of towns and just regions in England and things like that, and in Ireland and what have you. And he really gets into the whole idea that people used to have a structure of society that was based on their cosmology, which was more polar in nature. And so they created, essentially, they created what they refer to as like a ringland structure. And so they would have their sacred center in the middle. This is where they would congregate. This is where they would, do rituals and ceremonies. This is where they would create new laws. It was a very, very important thing to acknowledge the center of your region of where your people lived. So again, if you all lived on an island or you all had a small country, you knew exactly the middle of it because this is where people would come from all corners of the region to to trade and to do different sorts of things. And so to me, that makes a lot of sense that there would be a ringland structure. And so in the middle would be this cultural totem. And then from there would be other rings extending out from there that had different purposes. So my understanding is that some ringlands were designated for different classes of people and were designated for different things, maybe for growing food or whatever. And so everything emanated from this central point. And he goes through all of these different examples in the book of different towns whose name ultimately translates to like middle or center, or the point of division, or these stones around Europe that were called dividing stones because they were at the middle of this ringland structure. So then from there, everything was divided. So the four quadrants of the ringland, and so he goes through so many different examples. He also goes through a couple of Egyptian examples of kings who basically understood kind of like the geomantic angle with all of this, and they wanted to put a temple, in the middle of Egypt, in the middle of the land that they ruled, and they understood that you want it to be centralized so everything reverberates from there. It reminds me a lot of Atlantis and the Atlantean rings. And so Plato's Atlantis with the concentric rings, I don't know if this is a universal thing, but it seems like this was fairly common amongst people back in the day, that having a circular concentric ringed structure for your people, that was just like the deal. They didn't think in terms of squares and grids and things like that. It was more circular. And so it makes me wonder too if this is actually what Lord of the Rings is actually all about. So yes, it's about an actual ring, but it's Lord of the Rings, meaning Lord of the Ring lands. And then this just reminds me too of the whole idea about, there being spheres within spheres, the alchemical sort of way of looking at like reality in the cosmos and things like that. So I'm just starting to acknowledge that concentric rings, just like the growth rings of a tree, just like a ripple in water, this was like a bigger deal, I think, under the geocentric landscape. And it makes sense to me that geocentric people, Earth-based people, had a stronger connection with the northern sky and with Polaris and all of its functions and how it operates. And so it was an as above, so below thing. They figured that if this is good enough for the heavens, this is good enough for us. So we should just mirror things accordingly. And so that's a whole rabbit hole. But yeah, I can't recommend this one highly enough. So let me just cruise through here and see if there's any interesting chapter titles. So finding the center, sitting around the fire, that was a thing. So this as above, so below concept, it basically it went from, your village or your region was ringland based, concentric ringed based, and then your home was as well because you lived in a circular hut or you lived in a circular structure, and then in the middle of that structure you would have the hearth, you would have the fire, and then you and your family would be around the fire, and this is where you would cook and stay warm and everything else. And then literally your hut had this opening at the top, and so your home also mirrored what you were seeing in the heavens. It was circular based. So he gets into that, which I think is really interesting. Um, he talks about geomancy, contemplating the navel of the earth, the central point of paradise, all of these different things. Also, too, related to these concepts, and I have to give credit to Marty Leeds and Jenny B for turning me onto this one, but polis, as in metropolis, as in Minneapolis. The polis, Polis, is a reference to the pole. So we have city centers, right? And so a city is like a cultural center. So it's almost its own symbolic pole, and things radiate from there. But people want to go to that central hub, right? And even buildings themselves, buildings are very phallic. Really, buildings are towers. Buildings are just modern towers. And so sometimes that cultural sacred center location was actually was the home of a central tower as well. And so anyway, this is a thing that like I can geek out on all night. But suffice it to say, I think this is a good one. So if you're interested in this material, this one comes highly recommended. The next one's kind of juicy, guys. It blows my mind the places I've found Northern symbolism. And so here, just look at this cover. Do you notice the Big Dipper right there? Um, and so I read this one and it blew my mind. And this one's from 1997. So there are older Necronomicon books. The Necronomicon rabbit hole is huge. There's so many different elements to it. And I have a few Lovecraft Necronomicon titles. It was a thing for me for a little while. I felt like as an occultist and a researcher symbolically, I had to do my due diligence and actually research and wrap my head around all things Lovecraftian and all things related to the Necronomicon and just see like what the hell is going on here, right? And so this book came out in 1997 by Simon. Simon is actually a pseudonym for Peter Lavenda, and I have another book here that he wrote, which is about the same material, which is really interesting. He wrote it under a pen name here, but then he wrote it under his real name elsewhere. And essentially what it gets into is this idea that the Lovecraftian gods, Cthulhu, etc., are basically um, reimaginings of the old gods, like the Sumerian gods. And so the way I understand everything is that Lovecraft wrote his stuff, his short stories and everything. And over time, people realized that the pantheon he created is actually usable, meaning that there's bones there, there's a structure there, and it makes sense that he essentially, all pantheons, in my opinion, they're just updates of one great pantheon. So whether you're talking about the Roman gods or Greek gods or Egyptian gods or whatever, Thoth, right, and Mercury and Hermes, we're talking about the same deity essentially. And so what Lovecraft did, people found out over time that Lovecraft created a new pantheon for modern sensibilities using this cosmic horror sort of angle. And so, well after Lovecraft had come and gone, people over the decades created their own Necronomicon books and created their own short stories within the Lovecraftian universe using the same characters and everything else. And so people, because they felt like there was a definitive structure with these gods, with these ancient gods that he was writing about, they started working with these gods the same way a Freemason might work with an Egyptian god, as an example. And so over time, this became a thing. People started working with the Lovecraftian gods, and basically, this book, when it came out, said, "Hey, yeah, let's work with the Lovecraftian gods." And it really just goes back to working with the Northern Sky and using it as the primary and preeminent gateway out of here. And so that's what this book is about. Even at the very end of this book, I will enlarge my screen once again so you guys can see what's up. So you see this table here? So this only goes up to, like, I don't even know what year. Not very, let's see, actually, just for fun. If it doesn't take too much time. Interesting. I'm getting dates. I'm pretty sure there is a yearly sort of breakdown here, though. All right, I might have to look a bit deeper, but long story short, this table here is showing you the optimal time to work with Ursa Major, which is why it's on the cover of the book, because Ursa Major goes around the North Star. And in the book, it says that, when the great bear hangs from its tail, that's when you want to do some of these workings, and where you can actually access this northern gateway for ascension purposes. And you're going to come back, but he gets into the idea that a lot of different groups from way back when basically did the same thing. And that a lot of times there's a reference to 7 steps or 7 processes, 7 kind of like gates or veils that you have to pass through in order to get to the other side. And actually, one of the images that I have used multiple times over the last couple of years, because it just blows my mind that this is even a thing. And if you're unaware of it, it might blow your mind too. So let's see. I know it's in here somewhere. But he gets into this thing called the pace of you, YU. And this is an ancient Chinese ascension sort of ritual where you literally are walking from star to star of Ursa Major in the hopes of actually ascending and going to a different place astrally. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it, actually. There it is. Don't give up, dude. Okay, here we go. All right. So hopefully you guys can see that there. I need to get a new camera. This is just the camera on my computer, and I don't know. I think I could do better. Anyway, so you see that Ursa Major, you see each of the stars there. This goes back to this idea of basically the moon being kind of like the first stepping stone to get out of here if you're going to go to the other planets or whatever. And so you want to start with the moon, and then you want to work your way to Mercury, and then Venus, and then the sun, and then Mars, and then Jupiter, and then the last stop is Saturn. So that's called the celestial gate, right? And so I think this is a really interesting thing. I took a class. I don't even know what it was called, but the guy was getting into the same idea that if you're trying to astral travel, that you want to stop at the moon, you kind of have to stop at the moon first. And it makes sense that that would kind of be like the way in and out of here. And so, just to kind of clarify, each star corresponds with one of the traditional 7 planets. And under this ascension method, you walk from star to star or from planet to planet. And then that's how you get out of here. And so, very, very interesting. And so, I had no idea that there was a very specific northern pole star Ursa Major connection with anything related to Lovecraft. And sure enough, he wrote about it in some of his short stories. And so sometimes he refers to it, I can't remember what it's called, but there's like some name for some, like it's a star, but it really does sound like to me it's the North Star. And I believe he wrote a story called Polaris even, and things like that. So this is a whole rabbit hole. It's really interesting. If you want to hear me unpack it a little bit more, better than what I think I'm probably doing right now, on Interverse, man, a long time ago, we broke down Lovecraft and I presented some of this material. And so if you search for it on the Interverse YouTube channel, you can find it. But this is a very, very juicy thread that I want to talk about more at some point. But long story short, guys, there are black magicians who work with the Lovecraftian mythos. They're not working with the Egyptian gods or the Greek gods or whatever. They're working with the old ones, the ancient ones from Lovecraft. This is a whole rabbit hole. It's fascinating. And wouldn't you know, some people correspond this northern symbolism stuff to it. And so, yeah. So that's one of the books, 1997 by Simon. All right. So not as not as dark, I guess. So the Arctic sky. So this is on loan. This was at a friend's library, and I was like, oh, I have to borrow that. And so the Arctic sky, Inuit astronomy, star lore, and legend by John MacDonald. For obvious reasons, I need to read this. I need to look into it. I need to take notes and highlight things and see what I can glean from it. And so, any group or culture that has like Arctic sky information, I want to know what's up with that. So like as an example, in this book, it says that at one point, Ursa Major, the 7 stars of Ursa Major, they were called the 7 reindeer. And sometimes you see 7 reindeer pulling Santa, which I think is very, very interesting because Santa is from the North Pole. And so there's a lot of stuff in here that I have yet to read, but I think that it's going to be worth my while to actually dive through it. And then obviously I will enlarge my screen once again. It's showing the northern sky and what's going on with all of that. And so I haven't even looked too deeply into this, to be honest, but I know I will at some point. And yeah, I'm sure it'll deliver. All right. So the next one we have here is from 2004. So this is The Isis Thesis by Judy K. King. This is another book that I've referenced a number of times, but I have not read it from cover to cover. But essentially in it, the thing that intrigued me the most when it was first introduced to me was that this woman, Judy K. King, supposedly has translated a lot of hieroglyphs, and shed new light about what they represent. And one of the things she gets into with this book is that she says that the Egyptians had this concept where upon death, their soul ascended through the northern opening, which she equates to the magnetosphere of Earth, which looks like a toroid, meaning that there's an opening up top. And so she basically translates some afterlife material from the ancient Egyptians and kind of puts a modern spin on it, a modern scientism spin on it. And so, therefore, I then have to translate it to what it actually really means because I think modern science has a lot of things wrong. That's my personal opinion. But there is Northern symbolism stuff going on in this book. And as you can see, Northern symbolism has a lot to do with the afterlife process and ascension and things like that. So once I heard that that was kind of the deal here, I'm like, I have to pick this up and see what's going on. And so at some point, I will be reading this one for sure. But yeah, so it came highly recommended. Shout out to Brother Panic, who turned me on to this one probably a year or two ago when he was getting into some of this material. So obviously, we're getting to some of the newest books here. All right, so this is Stairway to Heaven. So Stairway to Heaven, Chinese alchemists, Jewish Kabbalists, and the art of spiritual transformation. This is one of the other ones that I feel like is highly, highly recommended. So if they're, if you're going to pick up 2 or 3 or whatever, I would pick up this one amongst whatever else you might get. But it's easy to come by. It's by Peter Levenda, who is Simon, and it's really interesting because he wrote the Necronomicon book I just talked about, but he also wrote this book, and this is exactly what he's talking about in the Necronomicon book, essentially, but just under his own name. And I just have to say too, Peter Levenda, I need to do more research about who he is. He's written a lot about this subject, but he's I don't know, he's connected. I'll just say that. And so he's connected. So it makes me skeptical about who he is on a personal level. I do know he knows his shit though, and he's written a lot of interesting books. And so I just want to say that all of these authors that I'm bringing up, just because I have their book, just because I've read them, some of them, it doesn't mean I fully endorse what they're all about. It doesn't mean that there's just I'm just all about who they are or whatever. I read stuff that, a lot of people I don't think would be interested in. But I get something out of it. And so that's kind of the person I am. It's I'll read something, just to glean a few bits of information from it, but it doesn't mean I fully support what this person does. Right. But Stairway to Heaven, this book really gets into ascension material and how various groups throughout time had different ways of believing you ascended out of here, and also use this kind of primary northern opening to get to a temple, essentially, and work with your fellow lodge mates and stuff like that. And so there's lots of very interesting ideas here, but there's a few things that are common with all of these ascension scripts and stuff. And a lot of times it has to do with the number 7 and Ursa Major and Minor and the North Star and this Stairway to Heaven. And so the Stairway to Heaven, I mean, I'm just starting to think it does seem like it's a legitimate thing. It's an allegory, but it's an allegory about the North. And so he gets into it heavily. And again, it's literally about all of this stuff. Even, I'm pretty sure the very first image that he has when you actually open the book or when you read the introduction is Ursa Major. So right there, introduction, the Big Dipper and the North Star. So that's what it's all about. So this is a great one. It's an easy read. I thought it was excellent for what it is. So it'll catch you up to speed pretty quickly, in my opinion, with a lot of this kind of stuff. So yeah, check it out. All right. So the next book, this is from 2014. This is called North: The Rise and Fall of the Polar Cosmos by Gyrus. Um, I have yet to read this one, but I listened to a podcast and he was interviewed. He talks about this book. I was excited for a few reasons to come across this. One, how blatantly northern it is. Two, the fact that he has the subtitle of The Rise and Fall of the Polar Cosmos. I'm very interested in this transition. Um, and that it's a modern title. And so to me, it means that this guy, whoever he is, was really interested in some of the things I'm interested in. And we may not see eye to eye on everything. As an example, my very strong hunch is that the polar cosmos, it fell only in the minds of people, but it's still where we live, and all of the symbolism and the structure of the polar cosmos is still very much intact. It's just that our perception of things has changed, and what we tend to focus on now has changed, but it's still the same place, in my opinion. um, and so we have that difference. But I listened to a show with this guy, and it was on it's called the Secret History of Western Esotericism. So I believe the acronym is like SHWEP. So Secret History of Esoteric Western something or other. I should put it in the description when I'm done here. But you can listen to this guy get interviewed about this book. And I don't know. You guys might be interested in it. If you read it, let me know. Would be very curious to know what you think about it. Some of the chapters here. Let's see. It's actually pretty basic. I remember. Fire, sky, north, head, revolution, ice, space, etc. But it does look very, very interesting. So I have a feeling it's going to deliver, and I'm gonna get a lot out of it, even though we may not see eye to eye on things, which that's okay. All right, so 2019. This is Beyond the North Wind: The Fall and Rise of the Mystic North by Christopher McIntosh. And so I have yet to get to this one as well. This one came recommended to me. Actually, there's a very interesting woman that I had the pleasure of having a sit down conversation with a few weeks ago to talk about Northern symbolism, because she's very much interested in this material. And I asked her if she had any books. She recommended this one. I said, I already have it. She said, oh, great. I read it before it even came out. And actually, my name is printed in here as a review. And so, anyway, that's Ingrid Kincaid. And so she puts out work related to the runes and the Northern mysteries and everything else. But she recommended it. I'm looking forward to getting around to this one. This actually is the book that the book club that I'm a part of locally is going to be reading next. So if anyone is interested in this book club thing, maybe just throwing it out there, since I'm going to be reading this one for sure. If anyone else wants to read it alongside me doing it with this in-person book club, maybe we can kind of just do like a online version of the book club for people who want to read it. And then we could just chat about it. So within the next, couple of weeks, I'll actually be diving into this one to see what the deal is. But as far as chapters go, I can't remember if there's anything interesting here. The Search for the Land Beyond the North Wind, Midnight Land, Northern Light, Children of the Pole Star, Northern Mysteries Resurrected, etc. The North in the Age of Mass Communication. That's an interesting one. Cool. So there you go. Okay, so this next one here, 2019. Shout out to Zerolith for recommending this one. So I can't remember how it came up, but long story short, a friend of the sort of communities that I'm a part of online said, "Hey, there's actually a book where they make a direct correlation with the shape of the runes and the northern sky, and it has everything to do with Ursa Major." And so in this book, this couple makes the case that the runes come from the northern sky. And the woman I just referenced, Ingrid Kincaid, she speculates and she's way into the runes. And so she's a really cool person. I might actually interview her if she's into it for the channel at some point. But she was speculating that, that the runes maybe came from the stars and maybe from the northern sky. Well, these people, that's what they're saying. They're saying that the runes came from the northern sky, and they literally go through each rune and they say, "Hey, this is where this rune, where you can find it in the sky. This is where that rune, where you can find it," and it's all northern based. And so I have yet to read through this one as well, but I'm intrigued just based off of some of the images that they've put in there and just the concept of it in general. It seems like it might make a lot of sense, actually. I'm not saying that that's what I adhere to with the runes, but it is a kind of a curious sort of connection, and I want to get into it at some point. And I actually think my girlfriend, she's very interested in this topic, and I pulled this out the other day, and she seemed like it resonated, and so she's going to be reading it here pretty soon, I'm pretty sure. So, Northern Paganism, the Runes. And then the last official book on my little list here is a fun little read. It's called Humanity and the Big Dipper by Robert A. James. And this guy, I guess, was he is an attorney out of the Bay Area. And him and his kids were stargazing, and they pointed out the Big Dipper, and he started talking about the Big Dipper as he understood it. And then after the fact, he was like, "Hey, am I correct with this information, or did I relay the proper info to my kids, or am I just talking out of my ass?" And so he started looking into Big Dipper mythology, and he came across so much information that blew his mind that he eventually just wrote a book about it. And so here you can see the subtitle is "A History of Our Species in Relation to Seven Stars." And so there's a few really good things that he says in here that I had not considered. It's been a little while since I thumbed through it, but as an example, he was saying that it was customary for indigenous people around the world, if they could see Ursa Major, to use it as like a point of reference to see how good their vision is. And so there's all of these little traditions out there having to do with the Big Dipper and the North Star that are like, it's just like lost on most people. But if you do the research, you start realizing like, oh, the Big Dipper is kind of important. Oh, the Little Dipper is kind of important. Oh my God, the Pole Star, it's actually really, really important. And so he went down that rabbit hole, and he just kind of, he put together this little book. It's pretty small. But he put together this book just kind of outlining all of the different things that he learned about the myths and the symbolism and whatever. And so I don't know. I got something out of it, and I think that it's kind of cool for what it is. I wouldn't say it's the most highly recommended book of the lot, but if there's a book out there that gets into some of this stuff, I'm going to check it out and just see what's going on. So with that said, that is what I got. Those are 18 titles for you. So, like I said, if you guys happen to purchase any of these books, let me know if you read anything interesting. Please let me know, because obviously it's not like I'm going to be reading all of these at once here, as much as I would love to do that. If I had the ability to do that, that'd be cool. But yeah, so once again, the list is in the description. Look into it. If you'd like, if you have any questions, just let me know. But like I said earlier, I figured it it was a good thing for me to do this to let you guys know like how I tend to research things. Um, and that's just kind of like where I'm at right now. Also, if people have other books that they would recommend, please let me know. There's a few that I have in my cart that I'm going to be purchasing soon. But if there's something that I completely have not heard of, you think, or whatever, I would love to know what's going on out there. So I would strongly prefer to read a book in person than to read a digital copy. So if it's available physically, that's how I'll do it. But yeah, guys, thanks for being here. This was fun. So let me check out the chat and see what's going on. I might hang out for a little bit longer and see what's good. Yes. Hey, Sarah. It's nice to see you here. Yeah, indeed, for sure. Um, right. So Ursa Major and Ursa Minor oftentimes are called plows or wagons, wains, um, gourds, drinking gourds, as well as dippers. It's really fascinating. All of the different correspondences, but 100% the plow for sure. And I even put, you probably saw it in my last video, but I put a flag, an Irish flag. It's called the Starry Plow in my last video. And literally, you just see the stars of Ursa Major, and then they kind of superimpose like a plow behind those stars. So, yeah, that is absolutely a thing. You got it, man. No problem. Thanks for being here. For sure, for sure. I'm happy to do it, guys. Yep, yep, yep. You guys are awesome. I really appreciate you being here. It's so cool that people are interested in this stuff. So I feel much better doing this, by the way. Just kind of leaning into, what I'm interested in beyond beyond astrology. Although it's very much related, and I'm still going to make astrology content and things like that, but my heart is with all of this material right here. So yeah, it's fun just to kind of talk about it and see what's good. um all right, I'm gonna cruise through the chat a little bit more. Maybe I missed something interesting. Actually, I'm sure I did. Indeed, Brandon right here, he says kundalini energy, the serpent energy, travels up the spine, 33 vertebrae, climbing 7 hills, chakras, etc. That is it, dude. 100%, man. Hey buddy, yeah, thanks for coming, for sure. Right on. Yeah, exactly right. Pace of view equals star stepping. Yep. That's it. Yeah. Navel of the Earth is a Central American theme, definitely. It's even interesting when you look at like Nuit and Geb, Nuit is bending over, she's the night sky, Nuit, and her navel is like at the middle point of that arc, so there's lots of naval things going on with the Earth. Also in Portland, Oregon, where I used to live, um, there was Mount Tabor, and Tabor translates to navel. And so I'm pretty sure once you understand the symbolism, you just see it all over the place, right? But my guess or my very strong hunch is that Mount Tabor was probably the center of Portland, Oregon at one point. So it was the navel, of the city. Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That's really cool. Right on. Yes, there are awesome comments in here. Probably I'll have to read some of these after the fact. But yeah, some people have referenced Mount Meru as the central mountain. That's definitely a deal. Um, One concept that I have for a video, if you'll notice, the Rider Waite deck with the Emperor card, he's making the central mountain. He's sitting in a throne. There's mountains to the side, but he is sitting in the throne, and you could tell that they're trying to make him look like a central mountain. And so I think they're trying to make him look like Mount Meru. So anyways, Mount Meru has been on my mind a lot lately, actually. But yeah, people are talking about it in the chat. So anyway, right on, guys. Well, this was fun. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'm thinking my next video, by the way, is going to be about the magician card and the polar symbolism, the northern symbolism found in the magician card. Notice that the magician, he's always holding that wand, right? He's holding the world axis, guys. And in the Crowley deck, he's right in front of a pole. You know, this is the world axis. The world axis is the bridge or gateway that the psychopomp travels through. You know, it's a post. This is where we get post office from and postage from. So the messenger of the gods travels via this post, via the world tree or this bridge, this ladder. Once again, I really suggest if you guys have not seen my last video, what is Northern Symbolism, give that a go, because it's an introductory video, but I think I get to a lot of interesting information, and I think that you guys will appreciate it if you're here and have not seen it. Okay, so I have a few slides to kind of end the show with. Let's see here. Cool. If you guys like what I'm doing, probably one of the best ways to support the channel, True North or Symbolic Studies or me, Mario, is to join me on Patreon. So patreon.com/symbolic studies. I'm about 20 strong right now, and I appreciate every single one of those people there. And so this is just for general support. But you guys definitely get priority with questions and messages and things like that. Also, I'm available for study sessions and readings and consultations. You can just go to symbolicstudies.com and email me, symbolicstudies@gmail.com. Conversely, you guys can just text me. So 503-893-4606 if you wanted a tarot reading or a study session. Study sessions are fun because generally what people will do is they'll say, hey, I want to learn more about the tarot. I want to learn more about Aquarius, or I want to learn more about this myth that you've talked about. Can we just book some time to kind of get into some of that stuff? And so I'm happy to do that. That would be fun. And like I said, for everything else, you can go to symbolicstudies.com. I'm thinking I will see you guys either through a live stream or in edited video form later next week. So anyway, you guys have a great weekend. I will talk to you soon. Thanks.